From MTN, the Montana Television Network, this is Face the State.
And good morning and welcome to Face the State here on the Montana Television Network. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're enduring the smoky skies and air as all of us have been. I'm Jay Cohn, your host today. And joining us for Face the State is author Russell Rowland. Russell, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Jay. I really appreciate you asking me to be on.
Yeah, I think you're going to find today's program fascinating as Russell shares his experience of making a living as a writer in Montana. Tell us a little bit about, I know you were born or you're a Bozeman native. Tell us about your upbringing in Montana just so our viewers can get to know you a little.
Yeah, well, I was born in Bozeman. My dad was a student there when I was born. My mom and I just found the house where we lived a few days ago.
Is that right?
Yeah, so that was pretty cool. But we eventually ended up in Billings when I was 12, so this is pretty much my hometown. I graduated from West High. And then I was gone for 25 years and came back, and that's sort of what inspired me to write the book 56 Counties. Was when I came back, I realized I didn't know the state as well as I thought I did after being gone for that long.
Russell's latest book is called 56 Counties, A Montana Journey, a 2-year adventure. We'll get into it in a moment, but this is just the last of, you've published several books, all of which have been getting rave reviews.
Thank you, yes.
Tell us about your career as a writer. You said suddenly one day you just decided, I'm going to be a writer, and I asked you, how'd you make that decision?
Yeah, well, when I was in my 20s, I fell in love with books. I hadn't really been much of a reader before that, but for some reason I really got the bug and decided to give it a try, and I gave myself a year to get published when I decided to be a writer, and 15 years later my first book came out, so it's a lot harder business than I thought it would be. But yeah. I've published 4 novels now, and my 5th one's coming out next year. So
perseverance then is a trait that all writers need. I find it funny, just in your biography, you list the other jobs you held while you were trying to support yourself as a writer. You worked at an ad agency. You were a bookkeeper. Is that what they?
I was a bookkeeper. Yeah.
You were a video store clerk. For those of you who don't remember, there were stores where you could go rent videos at one time. You were a teacher, and you wrote fortune cookies.
That's true.
How did that come about?
Well, I was living in San Francisco at the time, and a friend of mine got a call from a guy that wondered if he was interested in writing fortune cookies. He was not a writer, so he contacted me and asked me if I was interested. It ended up being a very bizarre experience. I wrote 600 fortunes for fortune cookies, and this guy did an article about it for the LA Times, and he called me the least how did he word it? The least famous, most read writer in America.
That might be the most intriguing vocation for a short. How long did you do that?
It was just that one 600. Yeah, I don't remember how long it took, but yeah.
And it was something that just came to you right away, or did you get better?
Oh no, it was hard cranking out that many of them. So.
I'll bet. 600 of them. Yeah. Well, anyway, we're glad that you stuck to writing, because your works are pleasing people and getting rave reviews, as I said. Which was the first book? The Watershed Years?
No, In Open Spaces.
In Open Spaces, right.
My first 3 of my novels are loosely based on our family. My mom grew up on a ranch in southeastern Montana in Carter County, and so In Open Spaces, The Watershed Years, and Arbuckle are all loosely based on our family history in that southeastern Montana.
And the other book that caught my attention is called High and Inside.
Yes.
I'm a big baseball fan, and so I went, what's the connection here? Tell our viewers about that book.
Well, that book was more about being a stranger in Montana. It's about a guy who used to pitch for the Red Sox. He moves to Bozeman. He has a drinking problem, and he decides that moving to Bozeman might cure that, and of course he ends up creating a whole new set of problems for himself. So,
is that based on a true story?
No,
or
it's total. That one's totally fictional. Yeah.
Well, interesting. And before we talk about 56 counties, what's the book you're working on down the road that's coming out?
Right now I'm working on a memoir. It's called Be a Man, and it's basically about what it means to grow up in Montana. It's one of the themes that I'm kind of fascinated with, is how this area shapes us as people and shapes our worldview.
And that leads us right into the book that caught my attention. It also had a great write-up in the Magic City magazine here in Billings this fall. 56 Counties, a Montana Journey. Basically, it says 2 years you spent traveling to every county in Montana, interviewing people to touch base with all walks of life. And to do this and to prepare, you said you read over 100 books about Montana history.
Yeah, well, all are part of 100
all
books.
All are part of, well, we're all speed readers,
I did a lot of reading, yeah. Yeah, that book came about mainly because I came back here after being gone for 25 years, and I had already published 2 novels about the state, and I just really felt like I didn't know Montana as well as I remembered that I did. So I pitched this idea to my publisher, and I was very fortunate. I want to give a shout out to him, Alan Jones at Bangtail Press. He was willing to publish it before I'd even written a word of it. So yeah, I felt like what I wanted to do with this book, what I wanted to accomplish, was to take people on a journey with me to discover what this state is all about, what's happening around the state, and also to sort of weave in the history. So it's not a textbook, it's more of a journey of discovery, I think.
One of the descriptions I found of it, it says it's a combination travelogue, memoir, and historical account of what makes Montana such a unique place. That's a pretty well written sentence. Was that your writing?
That sums it up pretty well. No, it wasn't, but I think they captured it.
So let's talk about, I asked you the question before we started to record today. Do we really need 56 counties in Montana? It's a fascinating story how we ended up with 56.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we had about half that in the 19-teens, and there was a couple of individuals that decided they could make some money going around to some of the smaller towns and convincing them that they should be a county seat. So they offered to do the paperwork for a few bucks, and they ended up doubling the number of counties in the teens and 20s. And of course, we really have way more than we need now.
Right.
It has ended up being sort of a financial burden on the state. So
now, I always heard that the reason we had 56 counties was it was set up so anyone could ride on their horse and buggy and go to the county seat and get back in a day.
Right, and I think that was one of the selling points that these guys used in their in their pitch. Yeah.
So these were like salesmen.
Well, they were complete carpetbaggers, which we have a great history.
That is so funny.
Yeah.
But yes, as you said, 56 counties, it really has become a financial burden. Although I think the ship has sailed in combining these counties now. I think they're all locked in pretty much. We see some of these school districts that go to these cooperative districts to save money and where they can't really make a go of it as a single district.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening on the counties, but I could probably come up with a few that might want to consider combining forces.
Exactly. Every time they've tried to bring that up in the legislature, it got shot down pretty quickly, I think. So
So let's talk about this book, 56 Counties, a Montana Journey. You sent some pictures that you took along the way, and the first picture we're looking at here is of the Berkeley Pit, or at least some of the tailings that surround the Berkeley Pit today.
Yeah.
So did you start in Butte?
I didn't start in Butte. I actually started in Missoula. But, one of the things that I think is interesting about the history of Montana, I think Montana really serves as a microcosm for America in a lot of ways. In fact, I wanted to call this book, I wanted to subtitle it An American Journey, but we changed it to Montana because of marketing. But, starting with Butte, with the Anaconda Copper Company, we have a long history of people who come in and manage to manipulate the system to make a lot of money off the people that are desperate to work, and then end up leaving a big mess behind. The Berkeley Pit is a classic example of that. We have 3 of the largest Superfund sites in the country here, and I think it's always been a situation where they were eager to work, people were eager to take on these jobs, and they didn't think far enough ahead to establish any kind of a long-term plan as far as infrastructure or a way to hold the companies responsible. Libby's another classic example of that. So it's happened over and over again, and I think it's still happening, actually. So
that's the thing about history. It has a tendency to repeat itself. We're hopefully learning from some of the lessons of the past, But it's amazing how we run headlong into these situations and go, gee, this is sounding and looking awfully familiar.
Right. And it's understandable. I mean, there's a lot of people even now who, middle class, lower class people who are desperate to find jobs. And so, you know, anytime someone comes along with an idea, it's easy to understand why they jump on the bandwagon and just don't think about the long-term effects. So,
anybody, of course, talking about the history of Montana, you have to start in Butte because, I mean, you could start in Virginia City or the mining, but Butte was Montana for so many years. Whatever happened in Butte was kind of what was happening in Montana at the time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a natural place to start digging. Pardon the pun.
Well, and of course, one of the things that I didn't realize, and this is fascinating to me, is that the Anaconda Company owned all the major newspapers in Montana up until the 50s. I mean, I knew they owned them back then, back when the Daily and Clark were around, but I didn't realize it lasted that long. I think Great Falls Tribune was the only one that was independent. So they controlled the narrative of this state for a long time. And
controlled the government of the state for a long time as well. In fact, many people might argue that the company still exert a lot of influence in the halls. But it is that love-hate relationship with these large companies that have come in. I think you say taken advantage of the state or built their fortune on the backs of the hardworking Montanans. And then really with no exit strategy of all, kind of left us holding the bag as the situation there with the Berkeley pit and the asbestos and Libby. It is a hard lesson.
Yeah, and we're the ones that pay the price. I mean, that tax money is ours, you know, the money that pays for those super funds. So
we want to move to our next picture, which is right down the road from Butte, Anaconda. And there is the big stack that still stands today. I love to go cross-country skiing down the Mill Creek Highway there. But the reason I like to go there in the wintertime is you don't see the environmental damage that has been left
really true.
on that land there.
Well, and it's funny you would say that because I don't know how many people realize this, but Hamilton came into existence because Daly didn't want to see that damage either.
I read that in the excerpt of your book. Marcus Daly, of course, one of the big copper kings.
So he started Hamilton so his family wouldn't have to live in the spoils of his own creation. You know, they the farmers were up in arms about the fact that the smelter was damaging their cattle and their kids, and you know the company just beat them down with lawyers disputed all their claims. And but Daly, you know, it was pretty clear that things were not good, so he moved his family to Hamilton, created a whole new town there.
And left a very nice big ranch. The Marcus Daly Mansion still there. It's a big tourist attraction.
Yes, I toured that,
And what's your takeaway there?
Well,
it's a beautiful spot to escape the blight of Anaconda,
it's obscene. He had a big trophy room for his son's, safari expedition, so that was interesting. He and Daly both, he and Clark both ended up taking all their money elsewhere, and that's one of the things that I think is also a common theme throughout our history is that, you know, Clark ended up, his daughter inherited all that money, and she bought all these mansions all over the country, and I just always found it fascinating that she
I never visited hardly.
Never came back and never felt compelled to help the people of Butte. I mean, Butte is a classic example of what trickle-down economics looks like, I think, you know. There was no trickling down.
It trickled out. It trickled away. She just recently passed away. Recently, in the last couple
years ago,
and still lived in this big, wasn't a mansion, but it was a park.
She owned
from Central Park.
Exactly, She had a live-in nurse, and, you know, but all these mansions she owned, never visited,
Tell us about how the company maneuvered their way through the legislature so they paid little or no taxes, which really allowed them to take all their fortunes out of the state.
Well, it was pretty easy, actually. Clark and Daly were actually working together in the beginning, and Clark became the president of the Constitutional Committee that wrote the first Constitution. So they had it written into the Constitution. It was like
you got to get in on the ground floor.
Exactly.
Is the message there,
yeah.
apparently.
So for the next 30 years, they paid almost no taxes, and yeah, it's another fascinating part of the theme that runs through our history.
If you're just joining us here on Face the State today, our guest is Russell Rowland, an author who lives in Billings now. We're talking about his recent book, 56 Counties, A Montana Journey, where he traveled to all 56 counties. I've lived in Montana my whole life, and I haven't. There's a number of counties I have not been to.
Yeah.
It's one of my bucket list things, so when I'm going to have more time here shortly by the end of the year,
Yeah, you should.
I'm going to venture out and try to visit some of the places.
Yeah.
But which one stands out at you that maybe surprised you the most of the 56 counties? That's a kind of a surprising question.
Yeah, well, you know, there were quite a few surprises, and one of them actually was Libby. I had never been to that part of the state. I was really surprised to find that Libby looks a lot more like the Pacific Northwest than most of Montana. And Libby itself, I think, is a beautiful town. It's really a shame what's happened to it with the asbestos thing.
And that dam is huge. We're looking at the picture of the dam here.
The Libby Dam is beautiful. That whole part of the state is just fascinating. And another part that surprised me were some of the small towns in eastern Montana who have managed to find ways to be relevant and
survive,
productive.
yeah.
Like Scobie was a great example. I had a tour with an older guy there. I wish I could think of his name off the top of my head, but he was a font of knowledge, and he told me that Scobie, whenever they need money, like they had just built a new pool there, and he said whenever they need money, they just put the word out, and the donations come pouring in. They'd raised $1 million for this pool, so they have a very involved community up there, and they do pretty well with the wheat farming up there. So they have a lot more money than a lot of the counties in eastern Montana. So there were some nice surprises like that.
All right. One of the themes you said that I read was that Montana is not a wealthy state, has never been a wealthy state, but certainly we fell victim to some greedy and wealthy people over the years. Is that still happening today?
Well, I think it is. Yeah. You know, we have some of them. We have probably the most resources, natural resources of a state, of any of the states in the country. I think that's part of why we seem to be a microcosm of what's happening around the nation, I think. And I think there's always been sort of a natural battle between the companies that want to benefit from all those resources and the people that are diligent enough to think about, you know, how the environment is going to be affected by them. And it feels to me like we've gotten to a point where those two are so far apart that they can't compromise anymore.
They're just...
You look at certain industries like the sheep industry, which has really come to a standstill, and a lot of it has to do with, I think sometimes the environmentalists go too far. And in this case, there was this series of deaths to bighorn sheep that were attributed to regular sheep. There was some, legislation passed to prevent grazing in certain parts of down in Beaverhead County, especially, and that had a huge impact on the industry. Plus, the sheep were the places where they were grazing before had a lot of larkspur, which is a plant that they love, and that plant kills cattle. So, it has a domino effect when the people aren't thinking about the impact that this has on some of the working farms and ranches in Montana. So it's always a tricky balance, I think, and there's been a lot of situations where people just didn't talk about what the compromises were, and they've just things have fallen apart because of that.
Let's get back to Libby real quick. You said it's a sad state of affairs of what's happened to that town for people that aren't so familiar with the asbestos and the vermiculite mine that operated there for years and employed people and spurred a big economic boom for the town, but left just a terrible footprint.
Huge Superfund site, and they were aware of that. They were aware of the impact that was having on the town way before they admitted it, the company. And of course, they got off with some fines.
And I think the state of Montana knew it was happening too, and didn't do much about it at the time. Helena, we have a picture here overlooking the capital city. You can see the cathedral. This is from Mount Helena, the largest city park in America, I believe.
Oh, is it? I didn't realize that.
Title, even bigger than Central Park, but I believe that's the case.
Yeah. Well, I was hiking up behind the house of a friend of mine, Dave Dalthorpe, who's an attorney there in Helena. Helena turned out to be my favorite town in Montana, believe it or not. I love Bozeman, I love Livingston, I love a lot of the towns that you would expect people to love, but Helena seems to me like a sort of a nice little secret. There's so much art going on there, a lot of cultural stuff happening.
Right.
And they have these incredible bike trails there. It's just, I think it's kind of a well-kept secret as far as being a town that has a lot more to offer than people realize.
I lived in Helena for many years. I still love to go back there.
Yeah.
It is a great town. And the art, you mentioned, not just the Archie Bray Foundation. Let's talk about that. I don't think a lot of people really know about the Archie Bray impact there unless you've been to Helena and seen it.
Yeah, and that's an amazing facility. I love the fact that Archie Bray wasn't even an artist. I mean, this guy was just someone who loved art. He donated this facility, and it has turned into an incredible school that's pretty much nationally known now, where people come, actually world known. They come from all over the place to study there. That picture is actually of one of the older buildings that I thought was just kind of fascinating looking, but they have a great gift shop there where they offer works by their students, and they just have developed a great history of really top-notch teachers that come in and teach pottery there, and it's really a great place to visit.
And you can still go there and buy all kinds of pottery today and read all about it. And do they still do scholarships for people that want to pursue that passion of
absolutely.
working with clay?
Yeah.
There's still those big kilns in Helena. There's lots of them still left that were used.
Yeah, it used to be a brick factory, so that was a perfect fit for them.
So there's, if you want to learn more about Archie Bray and the Archie Bray Foundation, some of it's in your book, but there's a world of resources out there. Here's another one of my favorite towns, Phillipsburg. But
That's your favorite town?
Well, I've had some good experiences there. I covered a Class C football game there once between Phillipsburg and Ritchie back in the 70s with my friend Cato the Cat Butler. But Phillipsburg, they've got a great brewery there now.
Yes.
And I like to fish the nearby Rock Creek. Yeah.
Yes.
What's your story of Phillipsburg?
Well,
Granite County.
I had a great experience there as far as I stayed in an amazing bed and breakfast just completely by accident. I found this little bed and breakfast, and I happened to be the only one there that night, and they fed me an incredible breakfast the next morning. But the thing that's fascinating to me about Phillipsburg is it has like a lot of Montana towns are having to do now, it has embraced the whole idea that we need to be welcome tourists more. You mentioned the new brewery there, and a lot of the towns, smaller towns in Montana that have open breweries have been surprised how
economic boom.
It really is. It brings a lot of business into the area. People actually tour all over the state to visit all these different breweries. But yeah, Phillipsburg is really it's a beautifully restored little town. It's got that candy store, and so I think and
it's off the beaten path. To get to Phillipsburg, you have to want to go there. Just down the road from beautiful Georgetown Lake. And, you got to take it slow on that road coming down, but it has a great story.
Yeah,
and then let's talk about the High Line. You have a picture here. Shelby to Chester up on the High Line, and it's a classic shot of the grain elevators.
Yes, the High Line. You know, I am perplexed, and I think a lot of people are, by how the people on the High Line in a lot of eastern Montana are going to survive. The farm disaster of the 80s, I think, is still impacting people there. And I don't know the answer to how they're going to make a living up there. I mean, they're losing their young people by the score. Nobody wants to stick around. So it was sad, but at the same time, I found the High Line, the people there, just like anywhere in Montana, to be incredibly optimistic, and you have that. I always think about the fact that, so many of the homesteaders that came to Montana didn't make it. So the ones that did make it were tough and persistent and creative. And I think the people that are here now are from that stock, So you've got a lot of
that's
people.
built in our DNA.
It really is, yeah. I think it is. And on the other side of that coin, we have this incredibly high suicide rate.
Right.
I was just reading earlier today, actually, that there were 900 suicides among farmers and ranchers in the 80s in Montana and the Dakotas and a couple other states. It's a tough time for people that are.
And you
trying
think
to
it's
make a living.
because our history, or what I read, our history of being dominated by industries, that people became so resilient, and they just knew things had to get better.
Yeah.
But they also were taught to kind of hold all that in.
Yep.
And that may be now coming to the surface with this terrible suicide issue that we have.
I think it's true. There's this real pressure to be self-sufficient and to keep your problems to yourself, and that's a part of our culture that's hard to overlook. Plus, we don't have a great system of mental health care in the state at all. There's only one psychiatrist in the whole state east of Billings.
Really?
That whole part of the state is covered by...
I bet he's easy to get in to see. No.
Right. It's actually a woman.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, good for her.
Yeah.
Good
She's
for
up
her.
in Glendive.
In Glendive.
Yeah.
Plus, we have a great, they always say, as far as our veterans, the highest per capita people that have served.
Right.
And now we know the problems that a lot of these veterans are coming back with, holding things in. I think of the public service announcement on the radio, where the grandmother's talking about her grandson coming back with a wound you couldn't see, but it was the PTSD and all the baggage of the war. And we really don't really have a good system to deal with that.
No, we don't. Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a big issue.
Now, this last photo we were going to show, this is from down in the Dillon country. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think.
Dillon to Virginia City?
Yeah, that's the road from Dillon to Virginia City. And I think.
Along the Beaverhead River, and beautiful part of Montana.
I think that's a beautiful part. And, speaking of the suicide rate, Beaverhead is one of the highest rates of suicide in the state. And it was surprising to me, people always jump to the conclusion that the Native American population probably affects our suicide rate. There is a higher rate of suicide on the reservations, but most of the highest rated counties were nowhere near the reservation. That surprised me. Beaverhead was one of them, and one of the statistics that a professional pointed to was that it has the lowest rate of people per square mile. So isolation, that's a big part of it. Yeah.
Finally, and we only have about a minute to go, but you talk about healing the wounds of the past, and then we've really never come to grips. We've never really apologized to the Native Americans for all the things that they did, and you think if we could, that's just one example, but if we could come together and maybe have a group hug, we might come out a stronger community for it.
Well, I think the narrative for that has been skewed so much. But, there was the conflict that happened between the natives and the non-natives was triggered by money, always. And it was a classic example of divide and conquer. So the settlers were the victims of the natives were the victims of the cavalry, and they were fighting against each other in a fight that neither one of them asked for. And that's, I think, always been the tragedy of it.
Fascinating. Russell.
Thank you so much.
Great discussion with you today.
I really appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to reading more of your work.
Thank you.
Russell Rowland, a Montana author. His book we've been talking about, 56 Counties, A Montana Journey. We highly recommend it. Thanks for joining us. Endure the smoke. We'll talk to you again soon.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.